If there is evil in this world, it lurks in the hearts of men.
Back in the early reaches of 2008, I joined a group online that kept talking about a video game series that everyone in the group was addicted to. The game they kept talking about constantly was Tales of Symphonia, an RPG with a deep and rich story that everyone in my small group of friends was absolutely obsessed with. The group again got obsessed with another game that came out around that time called Tales of Vesperia. My curiosity peaked and I began watching videos online for the game, and for my birthday in 2009, I got an Xbox 360 and one game, the only game I wanted for the console, Tales of Vesperia. From that moment forward, I bought every game in the series on release, and even when games didn't release at the same time internationally, the 2010s were a cruel decade to me, I'd often buy the Japanese copy of the game. This trend has continued all the way through until today, where my love for the series has reached an octave high, and I'd like to deep dive into the latest games in the series, and specifically its combat. The combat in the series has changed a lot over the years, and I'd like to explore this and ask the question, is the Tales of Arise combat system the right direction for the series' signature combat? Hello, I am Parasitic Serum, and if you hadn't guessed by the spiel, I'm a huge Tales fan. For the past 6 months, geez, it feels like it was only yesterday, I've been doing some short-form TikTok videos on video games. However, for the longest time, I've wanted to do some more in-depth videos on some games I like to talk about. So today, I thought I'd start things off with a series very close to my heart. I am Parasitic Serum, this is Debug.Games, and today I'm analysing and debugging the combat design of Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise is the 17th game in the long-running and self-obsession Tales series. Being a few big firsts for the series, it was not only the first game in the series to launch fully simultaneously worldwide on all major home consoles, sorry Switch, but also the first game in the series to use the Unreal Engine. The tale in question starts us off on the planet of Dana, a world suppressed by the people from the planet in the sky, Renna. Dana's people are ruled as slaves by the 5 Renan lords that have carved out the 5 territories and compete in the crown contest for the crown of Renna. I guess some countries go for the whole voting season where you have to sell yourself as a candidate, and planets like Renna go for the whole let's take over this portion of this planet and see if we can farm the resources the most, and whoever does becomes the ruler of our world. Same thing, really. After a brief, atypical Tales introduction into the state of the world, we get introduced to our hero, Iron Mask, who will later go by the name Alphen, a slave clad in a mask who cannot feel pain. After an incident on a train, Alphen meets a young Renan woman, Shion, whose touch causes nothing but pain. The two form an unlikely team as they attempt to take down the 5 Renan lords of the lands and create the Renus Alma from the 5 cores owned by these lords. Eventually, the group is able to recruit the sassy but shy mage Rinwell, Law, who is quite literally the definition of punch first, ask questions later, and later on the Renan Lord, Dohalim, and his trusty guardswoman, Kisara. The game quickly takes us on a mad adventure through the lands of Dana and beyond as we unpack a truly timeless tale. From a story point of view, this game very much hits the nail on the head of feeling Tales-esque, the conceptual struggles of people versus corruption and complex resource issues across planets being at the forefront of many games in the series. I think the story themes in Tales games are honestly fantastic and definitely follow a really interesting and cohesive theme, and that's something I'd really like to break down in the future, but we're here to talk about the combat of the series, so that'll have to be for another day. Gameplay in the Tales series has several aspects to it, but one of the primary components of gameplay has always focused on the series signature linear motion battle system. This system was first introduced right at the start of the series with Tales of Phantasia, mere months before I was born. From here, it's evolved over time, with each version improving on its previous and adding its own flair, causing each game to have the same scaffolding, but ultimately a truly unique experience in each installment. However, if we were to turn back the clock all the way to 4 months before I was born, we start at the very beginning of the series in 1995. Tales of Phantasia started the series off with LMBS, or Linear Motion Battle System. Linear Motion Battle System itself consisted of character movement along a 2D linear, line from left to right. On top of this, the player could also jump. Tales of Phantasia has you playing exclusively as Cress, or Kless. But we're going to go with Cress because I don't want the Hordes of Tales fans to come and lynch me. Cress has a few techniques that can be used in combat leveled up and use and ultimately combine together. When another party member or enemy uses a spell, they will temporarily take over the camera and show this ability off. Using Cress's techniques will reduce the amount of MP the character has, which can be restored through various healing items. Whilst the LMBS system is a little more in-depth than this in reality, I think a simple breakdown suffices to give a base understanding at any rate of the modules that make up the game and its combat system. The following modules in LMBS can be easily seen all the way from the beginning. Movement I've sort of covered already, but this is the capacity to move the character in the linear fashion within LMBS. Art execution, which at this point was called techniques, these will be later known as arts. This also covers the limit set on these abilities to prevent the player from using them indefinitely and be able to sort of acceptably use them within a fair resource. Art combos, the capacity to combine these said arts and techniques together into multiple hits to be able to stall enemy movements as much as possible and rack up incredibly high combinations. And cooperative AI gameplay, the capacity of the other members of the party in combat, what they're able to do, their limitations, and how they function as party members alongside you. We do have another module popping in later on in the series, but at this point in time, these were the 4 cohesive aspects of the gameplay system. Now we understand where the gameplay in the series started, let's see how it's evolved over time from this more fencing, martial arts style system into the more hack and slash gameplay we see in Tales of Arise. Skipping ahead to our first big jump in the series, we reach Tales of Symphonia. Here a few notable changes have happened to LMBS. We're going to record these in a changelog-like format. To start, multiple characters can be selected and swapped between, so instead of just controlling Cress like we did in Tales of Phantasia, we're able to swap between all the characters in combat on the fly. TP, or technical points, have become the de facto standard for art limitation within the art module of combat. Multi-line gameplay has now been added as part of the transition from 2D to 3D. Multi-line essentially draws a 2D line from the player, character, and the enemy. If you change targets midway through, a new line is drawn to the new target. The player can only move left or right along this line, meaning that whilst the gameplay is done in a 3D space, the gameplay is still effectively two-dimensional. Overlimit also makes its first appearance in the series. Characters have a hidden stat known as tension points that, once fully reached, will unlock overlimit temporarily. During this state, characters in overlimit will take half damage, spells cast quicker, characters can't be staggered or knocked out of spell casting, and special level 3 arts can be unlocked. Enemies are also able to access overlimit and gain similar effects throughout its duration. The next 3D game in the series was Tales of the Abyss. If we consider Tales of Symphonia the series' first foray into 3D gameplay, Tales of Abyss is able to take the natural problems and growing pains you'll get when you start something and refine and improve upon them. Anyway, let's look at the LMBS changelog for this game and what's changed as we move into the Flex Range linear motion battle system. Free run is added to the game, finally allowing a player to hold down a button and control the character completely free of the linear line limitation. Overlimit now exists as a gauge on each player that can be filled and consumed. Similar effects to previous remain with overlimit uses, taking half damage and not being staggered. Mystic Arts can be used during this state. Something I want to address here is that certain games in the series have been skipped. I've skipped a fair amount of the 2D games in the series, and I've also skipped a couple of the 3D games as well. This has been purely because I've been trying to look at the games with the most pinnacle changes throughout the series and where the alterations to the combat system have pivoted the hardest. I think this allows us to build the best map as to how combat evolved towards Tales of Arise, as opposed to looking at each game in the series individually and drawing a really detailed map. I think that's something I'd be interested in doing, but I don't think that's the video for today. Tales of Graces and Tales of Graces F was arguably the biggest shakeup of LMBS within my lifetime, with the 3 main modules all experiencing some form of major shakeup. Movement module changes. Free run is removed and replaced with sidestep. This means that while guarding, characters can slide around the battlefield to dodge attacks and freely move around. The ELIF gauge replaces overlimit, however does essentially the same thing of preventing staggering, offering unlimited CC, and giving access to Mr. Carts. The enemy ELIF gauge is visible and both ELIFs can't be active at the same time. So, what changes does this still nameless version of LMBS offer in Tales of Arise? Let's take a look. For the movement module, Tales of Arise adopts the Berseria style of movement, essentially not having a linear system but with a far stronger focus on dodge rolls and evasion, doing away entirely with the traditional shift style evasion methods that birthed in Graces. Despite missing the series' traditional linear system, it honestly feels the best way forward in terms of offering gameplay and movement that works for both veterans and newcomers. Normal attack still exists by way of a bumper button. 3 of the face buttons act as art mappable buttons, taking down the standard 4 arts mappable to 3, but offering a jump button on the 4th face button. When in the air, special aerial only arts are available, essentially offering 6 mappable arts per character. Each character also gets a special linked art option, with each character allowing for different combinations of these to do a fair amount of damage. The real intrigue for me when we started this is how the art module has been handled. Throughout the series and this video, we've gone through many different styles, with a more traditional TP model to the more unique and action-packed CC, and eventually the AC and TP combined system. With so many different options with varying levels of success, how much did Tales of Arise take this into account, and how does it tackle this complicated question? So, art usage in this game, whilst it initially looks like the CC system from Tales of Graces, is the art gauge or AG system. Art gauge grows over time, and each art costs some of the art gauge, normally 1 or 2 AG per art. The AG gauge recharges over time and under certain conditions, allowing combos to resume and continue to function, essentially acting like an improved version of AC and CC. Certain arts will also, if used in a specific way, actually restore the AG gauge, allowing you to just continue going on and on depending on how your system's built. This creates a good middle ground between having a system that's complicated and skill dependent enough for those that want to be able to enjoy it, while still being accessible enough to those that just want to be able to enjoy a more hack and slash style of system. However, for healing abilities, there's also something called CP or cure points. These act like a pool of TP, specifically for healing abilities and spells, meaning that you can't just spam your way through AG to heal, but rather must use this pool of CP to ensure that you can continue fighting. If the pool runs out, then you can refill it with items, meaning that it does act similarly to TP in this respect. Moving on, Overlimit takes a more Symphonia style route, with no gauge as such, but with certain conditions pulling players towards Overlimit, allowing them to access Mr. Carts, and arts don't consume AG during this state. Honestly, I'm personally more of a fan of the gauge-based overlimit system as opposed to the scenario-based one we see here, and I'd like to see more done to improve this situation in the future. I personally prefer the Vesperia style system the most. Since Tales of Graces are moving into Arise, combos are much easier to perform, as they only require either AC in Exilia or Soul's CC in the game's Synth to be able to continue that combo. This has led to a system feeling far less complicated as you've moved through it. If we look at our original modules for the games and graph them out at the major points we've looked at, we can paint a picture of trial and error that the series has taken to improve them. Whilst modules like Character AI have taken a rather back seat and faded into the background as we've progressed, though still being present, modules like Art Combo and Execution Systems have gone through a major sense of trial and error. Specifically during games like Graces and Exilia, we can see the series dipping into and out of the CC style of combat, but then dipping to a more TP based and then finally attempting to fully embrace it in the game's Synth, utilising CP as a way to handle bigger arts like Regenerate. I think we can draw a conclusion that Grace's and that style of system has had a clear impact on the design team, with the team feeling that it was a strong system from the beginning, but perhaps being drawn back by Grace's F's sales in comparison to the rest of the series. Since then, they've almost tried to ease us into this style of system, taking the best aspects of both TP and CC styles to end up with the Arise AG system. The movement module has taken a rather linear growth from being very rigid and obtuse at the start of the franchise with Phantasia to a slowly more and more free form of movement, with additions of aspects like free run and then full three-dimensional movement, leaving the linear aspect of LMBS in name only. If you compare this to the art system, there's been a lot more of a linear growth in this system here, but I think you can really track how the series has slowly moved more and more away from linear and focused more on a free roaming aspect. I think the reason it's taken so long is honestly rather clear, at least to me. Movement has very much been at the core of Tales' combat system. It's literally called the linear motion battle system. So to suddenly just jump for 3D movement from day one in a game like Phantasia would beg the potentially philosophical question, is this even a Tales game? However, instead of doing this, the team at Bandai Namco have slowly moved us towards a full 3D movement in a rather careful manner, almost ensuring that the core of the Tales experience isn't lost as the movement happens. Finally, worth noting is of course the overlimit system, which has not evolved in a linear or forks linear fashion as opposed to the movement and art systems respectively, but rather overlimit has changed very rapidly with each installment, changing in similar amounts between Abyss and Vesperia, but in the game since, the way in which the overlimit state is accessed has changed rapidly, and in a game-dependent fashion on each installment. Honestly, in my humble opinion, this is perhaps the only part of the Tales of Arise combat system that didn't feel like the best iteration, and perhaps could use more time to nail, but that's just my opinion. From an objective point of view, I feel like we've charted the course as to how the game design for the series has evolved over the past 25 years. What started as a very simple and heavily influenced by the games of its time system has evolved into a combat system of its own, inheriting quirks of its predecessors as it's passed down from generation to generation. Each time it's become not necessarily a stronger system, but a more refined system in different areas. Each game has ended up having at least one aspect of its combat system remain in the series in some way, all the way up to the point of Arise. A clear course can be retroactively charted for the series as it moved from 2D linear side-scrolling combat to a full three-dimensional system. Elements from the game's Tales have remained and become a signature part of the series' recipe. I think if there was an adjective to describe the direction the series has taken retroactively, it would be careful to remain Tales. By that I mean the series hasn't attempted many radical shifts at one time, rather opting for smaller changes in its signature style as to not overwhelm and push its audiences away. Instead, what we have here is a series that's looked at each installment and gone, okay, this is what worked, but what can we improve for next time and how do we keep it fresh? Sometimes this balancing act has worked and sometimes it's not. However, one thing is for certain, wherever the series goes next, I'll be there on day one, excited to give it a go. I hope you enjoyed my deep dive into the combat of the Tales series. This is honestly my first attempt at this and it may end up changing. I hope you enjoyed, and any and all feedback is of course appreciated. I really appreciate the time you spent if you got this far into the video. If you enjoyed, please go follow my TikTok, Twitter, Twitch if you want to. You don't have to, it'd just be nice if you enjoyed this, you know? Anywho, as I always like to say, I have been Parasitic Zerom. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.